Hi, I'm Faye.
And I'm Tracy. And welcome to More Better with Tracy and Faye. More better. More better.
More better with Tracy and Faye. So Tracy, what are we doing today? Tell me.
I have a question for you. I have a question.
All right.
My question for you is, why, given the whole umbrella of communications, we know there's a lot in professional communications, media relations, investor relations, community relations, public relations, employee communications, leadership communications, all these things. Why, Faye, did you focus your efforts on internal communications?
Good question. I would say that, well, my first job right out of university was for a PR firm. And by PR firm, I meant it was 1-2 people. So it was a little PR outfit out in Vancouver. I was her assistant. She's a lovely lady. And we did PR. You graduate from communications and you think, oh, I'm going to go into public relations and be a journalist or whatever. But I had no idea. I just wanted to get a job in the field. And what we did were events, and we did tours for some, we would help someone on a speaking tour and then get media for them, trying to place in newspapers and all that sort of good stuff when newspapers existed. What was interesting was that it was fun in terms of learning the work. But what I quickly realized is I did not like working with media. I did not like crisis communications. I didn't like those things. So I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew right away that I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do that external side. So when I had the chance to, I think another job, my next job probably was working inside an organization and doing sort of their internal, it wasn't even really internal communications, really. It was at UBC. And so I was doing communications for students, right? But within this sort of little world, contained world, right? I liked that. I liked the idea of that. I liked the idea of doing things where you could connect people to the values or the mission of the organization. How do you do that? And we were doing that quickly, it wasn't like what I think employee communications is today. I mean, at the time anyway, the job that I had, it was really just trying to okay, well, how do we get students to vote in the student election? How do we get clubs together to understand? I put an umbrella or arm around clubs so that they understand, the vision of the student union body and that sort of thing. How do we communicate what the student union is doing, what the good the student union is doing for students? So I thought that was interesting. And at the time we built our first intranet. And I thought that was really interesting too, because we also had we wanted to connect staff. We still still had a full-time staff of 50 plus people. So, the
good old days.
The good old days. Yeah, right. Exactly. So when you have staff who are working for students, so it was this little world. And I think that helped me, helped me to understand what internal communications was and the difference of that and what I didn't like, which was media and external and all that.
Right.
But, yeah.
Right.
How about you? What do you think? Sorry, that was a long answer.
I really only wanted a 30-second answer, but we'll edit.
I'm more verbose than you are.
People, you should see her planning document. I do 3 bullet points. She does 3 pages. Well, I think my evolution into internal comms was, I think, similar to yours in the sense that early jobs I got a taste of community relations. I got a taste of investor relations. I actually thought I wanted to make a career out of investor relations and started doing the Canadian securities course. and then realized that numbers just left me cold. The whole idea of numbers and, stock price and all that, there was not heart in that for me. And I ended up, again, it was just kind of by accident. I tried a few different stuff, doing stuff for not direct media, which also was not my favorite. But when I got the job I got at not Home Oil, that was my first job, which was mostly internal, but there was some other aspects to it. But at HSBC, which was purely internal communications, then I ended up leading that group. And all of the growth that I had within that job was getting more and more into the nuts and bolts of what employee communications or internal communications is about. And as I got more involved in not just writing news stories, because my God, if I ever have to write another newsletter, just throw me off cliff. But when I got into crisis communications on the internal side, when I got into change management, because we were doing, massive layoffs or mergers or whatever it might be, I really started to see the value of internal communications, and it felt good for me because I knew I was serving the needs of the people who work there.
Yeah.
And that was a place I was really happy to be. And that's why you and I, when we were working together, and people they'd say to us, or they'd say to me, they go, "Ooh, you're like the internal spin doctor." I'm like, no, I'm not. And then they would hear this, 10-minute rant about, I don't spin anything, people. This is about helping people understand what their job is and the goals that they're trying to make, and having the head of the company understand what everybody else in the company needs and wants and deserves in terms of communication and transparency and messaging and all this stuff. I am not a spin doctor. Oh, that used to piss me off.
Me too. It
Right?
totally does. Yeah.
It's like, no, that's not why we're here. But guess what? If I say, hey, do you remember that time that we had to switch from, using an abacus to using a calculator? And they're like, yeah, I remember that. I'm like, how was that switch over? And they go, actually, it was pretty smooth. And I'll say, you're welcome. These things don't happen by accident. It takes planning and thought and consideration and expertise.
And smarts. Yeah.
And smarts. Exactly. Yeah.
No, I like that. I think I love that, because for me, it's the relationship between the organization and its employees.
Yes.
I don't know. I just think it's such an interesting connection. It's an interesting relationship. Like we've talked about this before, totally. Right? Like yeah. I know I'm a broken record, but I always think about people who work here, like they've made a choice to work here. They have families. They have they're interesting people. Like they have lives, right? Mm-hmm. So let's treat them as adults and speak to them like humans. I know that's kind of our thing, mm-hmm. but yeah. I stand by that.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're marketing and promo, yes, you can. It's different.
It's
right?
different.
It's a different relationship.
I used to be. Sorry, let me back up. One of the things that evolved over the course of my career is the wall between what happens internally in a company and what people are aware of externally as in a company, that crumbled. But when I was first starting out in my career, the marketing department could say anything. They would make a decision and they'd say something, marketing, to try to draw in those customers.
Yeah, whatever.
And I remember at the time thinking, okay, well, that sounds awesome, but that's actually not the experience of working here. So when a potential customer goes into a business and meets that frontline employee and says, hey, I want to buy this, or I want to do this service, or whatever it is, and they don't get that experience that the marketing promised, that's a problem. And I think that happens less and less now because the transparency has been forced upon organizations because technology allows internal to become external immediately.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that wall, or that invisible wall, is still there. And I'll give you a couple of
okay, yeah,
please. Like that. So just a couple of examples in some of the work that I've done. So, I mean, there's a companies might have social media, internal social media. So that's something that's sort of like, blossomed in the last 10 years, let's say, even less than that. And so, because everyone is on some sort of platform, Insta, Facebook, like name your platform, right? And how some companies have been managing their social media is very different than what people experience, right? So outside, you might have, you might think I can say whatever I want. I can express an opinion without implications and all that sort of stuff, right? But when you're expressing that internally, it's different because you're doing that in front of your peers. You're doing this in front of your boss. You're doing this in front of the leader who's paying your check, right? So I think there's this sort of fine line between like, well, how do we manage that? How do we still give freedom to people? Because people still want to talk about anything from, the vision, whatever of the company maybe, to like sharing pictures of their pets. Right?
Babies and bowling scores.
But they still love that, right?
You actually raise a obviously super valid point, but it's on the other side. I was thinking of what I was saying, which is super interesting, because I was thinking about what happens between, a company. So let's say you've got this company and internally they're just driving people into the ground, driving them into the ground.
Oh, stupid company.
Like Tesla, actually. So here's an example, Tesla. So for the longest time, now it's all mired in, Musk.
Obviously not sponsored.
Business, yeah. Not sponsored by Tesla. But everyone loved the vehicles, right? It was cool, funky, blah, blah, blah. But what's come out recently is it's a pressure cooker in there, and it's disorganized. It's all these things. So the facade of Tesla existed for a while, and now it's blown up. And that's the kind of thing I was thinking about. But you raise an excellent point about me as an individual employee. I'm also visible to my company. Not only are the insides of a company visible to the public, my personal life and opinions are visible to my company. You're right.
Oh, yeah.
Through social media, etc. And that's also a scary place to be.
Yeah.
As an employee. And, you actually, if you are a rabid racist and you're just chatting among your good racist friends about that stuff, that's one thing. But if you go on Instagram or any of these public social media sites and start sharing those views, you could find yourself out of a job, as many people have discovered.
Well, let's face it, like you've chosen to make that information public, right? Yeah. So hopefully you understand what the implications of that is, right? So, it doesn't even have to be anything extreme, like
rapid racism,
rapid racism,
rampant.
But it could be like if you're posting photos like publicly, right? Like publicly of you getting, hammered every night and in uncompromising whatever, and you're looking for a job. Well, guess what? That recruiter is going to look through your social. They are. They're
going to see what you put on LinkedIn,
public, right? And from what I've heard from some recruiters I've worked with, they're like, yeah, we just kind of look. We don't.
Right.
Like,
they don't
make
stalk.
that judgment.
They're not stalking.
They're not going like, okay, well, she has these skills, but wow, she gets hammered every Saturday night. Like, it's not really like, what does that matter, right? But there's always a but, right? There's always an asterisk, I think, to this world that we're in. Can I share another example of that sort of?
No. Okay, no, I'm sorry.
I'm going to share it anyway. So, so I'm working on this project where, right now, it's a learning platform, right? So like a typical learning platform, like LinkedIn Learning or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's an internal one, and they improve it and all that sort of good stuff. And what's interesting is that there's no help features in the platform. So the problem is that they have to go to like an intranet or like somewhere else to get, how do I get support? I don't know how to do this. Now, and I was explaining to the project lead, that so we're so focused on like, what information are we going to put on these other places? But I had explained to her that in the tricky part right now is that in the real world, you find that help stuff inside software.
Yes.
Right. So that's why, because she's wondering, like, why are people not reading that? Why are people not understanding like how to do these things in the platform? I said, because the help stuff isn't in the platform.
Right.
And that's a problem.
Because then they send them outside of the company.
We got to
cross the street. They got to cross the street and go to talk to someone over there. And then you want them to come back here and apply the learning.
So it doesn't matter what awesome content we have somewhere else. The fact remains is we've created friction for people to get at the information that they need. And I think what's interesting is that in a comms role, like whether you're on a project or whatever, is that we can bring those in. Like, it's funny, right? Because they were like, oh, well, that's just what that we have to ask the vendor. And I'm like, well, because if you want, you have to ask the vendor and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, because I think that's the problem. The problem is not that it's a communication I mean, yes, because of the way things have been set up, but we can put the best resources, videos, how to, whatever, right? But the fact is you are making people do something that they don't do in real life. Because when I go to a learning platform or a Coursera, a Khan Academy, pick one, right? And I need help, I can just do it all there, right? It's frictionless, right? As I don't know if that's a buzzword, but probably, but it's a good one. I think it's
well, it's a new one, which means we can use it. I have determined,
anyway,
because I am the keeper of the buzzwords, just so you know.
But you know what I mean? Like, because, so I think you were saying earlier, so going back to your earlier point around, maybe it's less and less, but I think it's sometimes even more and more. Especially depending on the kinds of systems you're using, it's that sort of, I've heard it said in HR, is that Sunday to Monday experience, right? Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah. Have you heard that? Right. Yeah. Which is, makes sense, right? Like, that's why, if you have an intranet and you have a news, you probably have a news channel or something, and you don't allow comments. Well, the real world does. so what are we like? So right. That I think is like a little bit of I don't know if it's the right term, like a cognitive dissonance. Like, it's like, well, wait a minute, I do that on Sunday. Why can't I do this on Monday? Like, and then you start to question. And
well, you raised in your story a point that I've often used when describing communications and what we do. And it's not about words, it's about action. And if you want to get people to act in a certain way, whatever that might be, you want them to do something, you want them to not do something, you want them to share something, you want them to consider something and start applying it in their work. Those are all actions. So to get people to do the actions that you want, you need to understand people and what motivates them and what demotivates them or unmotivates them. What is it? Unmotivate?
I can't even. What words are we making up today?
Words we're making up. So I've often described like the when I call the best communicators, people who are really skilled out there. And I've met many. You're drawn to this profession for a reason. We are like, in some ways, we're a little bit like, psychology light.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Because we have to understand human motivation. And I need to know if I want people to switch from the abacus to the calculator, and they're super comfortable with the abacus, what's going to get them to change to the calculator? And we need to understand those motivations. And we need to know where will people get the information from that will make them want to act or, not act, so it's not just writing pretty sentences. It's actually understanding human motivation, why humans act or won't act, within the structure that we're talking about within our organizations. And I personally find that bit fascinating. That to me is, you just get to sit down and just really kind of go, okay, well, let's say we've got different groups of people because they're employee groups or maybe they're job groups or people are attached to certain things and go, well, people in this job, in this role have been, there's been a lot of pushback from the people who are these, manager of brown chairs. The managers of brown chairs are super unhappy. And so we need to understand what's going on with the managers of brown chairs. I always put these things in the context of change, but most communication is about some kind of change, some kind of action that we need people to do. And I find that fascinating. Oh, I have a story.
Okay.
It involves both you and me.
Oh, no.
And it is about kind of missing the mark.
Missing the mark of what? I don't even.
Well, it was interesting. So when Faye and I were working together, we were kind of adjacent to the HR group, and there was a lot of office renovations going on. You remember this. So there was going to be a big office renovation where all of HR actually had to work off-site for a period of a few weeks, maybe a couple months, before they were able to come back into the office. And so
Such an odd concept back then. Sorry, but
I know.
It was like, what? Not in the office?
Not in the office. I think half of them got to move somewhere else, and a bunch of people had to work from home for a period of time till the office was ready. And so you and I were going to be doing some comms around that. And I was driving into work one day and I had this great idea. It was going to be awesome. And it's because those makeover shows, the home shows were really popular at that time. And so came up with this concept, Extreme Makeover HR Edition.
That's right.
And it was just, we wanted to make it fun. My God, it's going to be really fun. And we made like tip sheets. Some were serious, most weren't. And, a bunch of stuff that was important. People got the information. They were able to receive it because it was presented to them in kind of a fun way. And then, then we heard the problem. I don't know if you remember this.
I remember the problem. I remember doing the fun stuff.
Yeah, a couple people went to the head of HR, our dear friend Chuck, and they were offended by our humor.
Oh, well, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, humor is so hit and miss. We think we're hilarious, and lots of people did.
What was his reaction? I don't remember.
I don't believe he would have given the people complaining about the humor a lot of his energy. But it was interesting to me. I was stunned because, of course, what I find delightful and what Faye find delightful, wouldn't everybody find delightful?
What?
So it was just an interesting learning. I mean, would I have done things much differently? Probably not. But
Probably not.
But I would take a different look I would stop to think, okay, humor's tricky.
It is.
Humor's tricky. Let's make sure let's do whatever we can to try to avoid being obviously offensive, obviously. But also just recognize that people are going to not all appreciate our attempts at levity. So you just never know with humans. I remember this one person at this one organization who had been at this place for like a long time, 30 years or something like that, was really unhappy with how everything was going lately. And then guess what? She got packaged out. There was, a bunch of layoffs, and she was one of the people who was packaged out. Holy smokes, was she angry? And I'm kind of going, you've been complaining for months about how miserable this place is and how much you hate it. And now you got a package, and now you're mad that you were the one who was laid off. It's fascinating to me, right? Because that's all, it's that understanding humans piece of it. And, you and I, we are not psych majors, but every time situations like that happen, we learn a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I find that super interesting. And, so we need to know that. That's part of what makes us good at what we do. And we have to be able to put, words on a page, fill the air with words that make sense. But we also need to understand people. Just to say that every time something happens that is unexpected for me, usually it's how an individual will react, not a whole group. I've managed to avoid entire groups of people being angry at me. Yes. But every time there is, right? But every time there is a reaction to a comms plan that I didn't anticipate, it's another opportunity to learn and go, oh, okay. Got to remember that one for next time because it may come into play again.
Yeah. Those are all, sounds cliche, but they're all learning moments, right? Like even that thing around humor. Yeah, you're right. Like humor is tricky, right? Sometimes we miss the mark all the time.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But we also hit the mark a lot of times.
We hit it more often than we miss it, which is why we have been doing this for so long and why we love it.
I love that. I think what's coming up for me is around the, when you said we're kind of like psych light, like the idea of understanding human behavior. I know you were teasing me earlier about, I read a lot of self-help books and stuff, self-help books.
Haven't you been helped enough?
No, obviously not. But what I find what's interesting to me is what I'm learning through that kind of self-discovery, if you will, whether it's about navigating change, adopting new habits, health regime, whatever that is, right? That I can apply it to my work. And to me, that's what's been exciting lately is that, you were just talking about, the people in brown chairs. I don't want to move. I like my brown chair. I don't want blue chairs. Fine, whatever. We have to understand not only why don't they like brown chairs, but I think what's interesting is because we're all humans, is what's really going on in there. Right? Not because they're a manager and you're in this company and blah, blah, blah. It's humanly, what's really going on?
What's really going on
there? And sometimes you can apply that to a group because maybe their identity is tied to the brown chairs and brown chairs mean something to them. You know what I mean? Maybe it means status or prestige or something. Okay. Right. Or if it's the leader, then what's going on for her or for him, right? Yeah. Is there something that they're holding on to? There's significance there. And, I think sometimes from a project management standpoint or even a change management standpoint is well, just get them to move. This is brown chairs. What are you talking about, right? And I'm not saying we have to dive deep into everyone's psych and have a big session about it. I'm not talking about that, but it's just being able to be human and to ask those questions and a check-in. And I think people do appreciate that. I don't know. I find that people respond to that when you come at it that way, as opposed to I don't know why you don't want to change.
Just change
on Monday. Yeah. What's your problem? Come on. Right? Let's just take a beat and take care of people.
So in an example of people who do not understand what humans need, this was my very first job out of PR school. And I was working for this oil company and they had to do a layoff. And this was in the early 90s when we were in recession. This is when you and I were both starting to work. I'm like, oh my God, I get a 1-year contract with no holidays. Happy for the job. And they had to do layoffs, and these companies, they're not used to layoffs because they haven't had to do mass layoffs for possibly ever, at least in this. And so there's this one guy who's one of the EVPs, and there was a discussion with HR about how do we go about advising these employees that their job is no longer there. Now, you can tell it's the olden days because everybody had offices, unless you were admin staff. And what this one head honcho's idea was to take the piece of paper, the letter, and slip it under the doors, the office doors of the people who were being laid off. And I think there are two things at play.
Coward.
Number one, cowardly, for sure. But also the other side of it, he was thinking, I'm sure, people don't really want to have it brought to their attention that they're being laid off. Maybe they'd be embarrassed and they want to have it be private. And so they don't want to talk to anybody. I think that's where his motivation came from, even though it was completely wrong. But yeah, it was both cowardly and not at all in tune with how humans need to receive bad news.
awful.
Wasn't that
so awful? Did they do that?
Just slip it under the door.
Did they do that?
No, because HR was in charge of that. And it was HR who told me that story. One of these women in HR, she's like, you know what so-and-so wanted to do? And I'm like, oh my God. And I was only new in my career, so I didn't really know what the right answer was. I just knew that sounded not right.
That was not it. Like,
I just felt a little bit... it's like arriving in the mail on Monday morning and you read your mail and you're like, oh, I guess I don't need to go to work today because apparently I've been laid off.
Yeah. I'm sure there are thousands of stories like of actually that happening. Like I know of one,
probably.
Like I know one of where they basically this was in the tech days, the .com, .bomb days. I know someone who worked for a big company. They all gathered in the atrium, right? Again, this is when everyone worked in the office. Mm-hmm. Said, okay, well, this is what's happening. Go back to your desk and we'll call you. so people went back to their cubes and
they're like going,
no, and the person I know, he said you could hear the phone like get closer and closer.
Oh my gosh.
So sitting in a cubicle. So think of productivity.
Everybody's sitting in cubicles and you're just waiting for your phone to ring because it's ringing around you.
So you can hear it, right? In this big floor or whatever it was, I think. And you can hear it like get close and then maybe it skipped you. Then it skipped this person.
Oh my gosh.
I was like,
oh man.
Oh, horrible. This is horrible, right? Like,
I know.
Anyway,
really
I don't know how difficult. We got on.
Anyway, it just, this started out why internal comms versus other and has moved on.
Obviously, we love it.
To you and I babbling about this. We love it. And this is why it gets us quite fired up.
Yeah, it does. Anyway, cool. I love this. I love it. Well, maybe we'll do this again. Let's do this again. I think
should we converse again on video?
Yes. Whether people want it or not.
There you go, folks. And that's it for today's edition of More Better with Tracy and Faye.